lots going on as usual. Usually my streaming is running on X and it's not up right now, so we'll see how that goes. Maybe we'll just be recording it for X people today. Regardless of that, Tamara Litch and Chris Barber will be sentenced tomorrow for the longest mischief trial in Canadian history. And so that's pretty wild. No retaliatory tariffs, says Mark Carney, because today is Liberation Day, according to Trump. But according to Doug Ford, it's Termination Day, and he is worried about how the tariffs are going to impact Ontario. And he's not excited about all this, even though USMCA-approved car parts are exempt from the tariffs. So he says he's going to have retaliatory tariffs. That's interesting as well. Trump files Rico lawsuit against Clinton, Clapper, Comey, and more. So that's interesting. Very interesting indeed. And the carbon tax is gone, but Bill C-69 will remain. That's not good at all. Carney is lifting Poilievre's speech and taking points and policy points, talking points and policy points. CbdCs have been launched in jurisdictions around the world as well. So, man, all sorts of crazy things going on. Lots to get to. Let's get to it. First, we have to talk about the carbon tax because that's the big news these days. And Carney's trying to ride that to a re-election victory or something to that effect. And that's weird. CTV News says, from the gas tank to the furnace, consumer carbon charge disappears. That's interesting, right? Like, very interesting. Gone, but I think that they're going to creep the gas back up, and people are posting how much the gas has gone down. And already it's like $1.29 to $1.31. Some people are posting $1.40, and it's like, and before the price came down, the price went up, right? They announced the carbon tax was going to be removed, and then they didn't remove it. They said, we're going to remove it immediately, and they didn't remove it. And then a couple of days after that, it went from like $1.50 to $1.55 for no good reason. And so they say, oh, it dropped by 20 cents. But people are making the argument that not really, right? They rose the tax, or they rose it by a bunch to offset the drop. Anyway, some people are reporting big drops. Vancouver's areas are seeing big drops and big variance as well. Some places are 192, some places are 209, some places are 139, right? So like that's big difference. Danielle Smith says, after years of relentless pressure from Pierre Poilievre and provincial conservative governments across the country, the Liberal NDP coalition in Ottawa has finally scrapped its punishing consumer carbon tax, which made Canadians poorer. Starting today, you'll save 17.6 cents per litre on gas and diesel, and $4 per gigajoule on home heating, putting hundreds of dollars back in the pockets of every Alberta family. This is the average. That's an average of $215 per year in fuel savings and $480 per year in home heating savings. We expect retailers to pass on these savings in full. We're watching and will hold them accountable so Albertans get the tax break they deserve. So an error occurred on streaming to X this morning. I wonder why that happened. Here is a Liberal MP and I guess candidate for the position again, Mona. She says, our policies, because she's a Liberal, are already hard at work. Gas prices are already coming down. We're putting money back in Canadians' pockets. Canadian families can trust a Liberal government will make life more affordable and bring down the cost of living, starting at the pump. Bull. Absolute bull. I think they're going to sneak it right back up. I don't think it's going to be down for any real length of time at all. The Remanded says, wow, $1.35 a litre of gas now in northern British Columbia, $1.92 to $2.09 at certain locations in Greater Vancouver area. That's closer to $160 more in cost of living if you're living near the coast. That's crazy. I will post if I see something lower. So Petro-Canada at 135.2. Wow, right? BC. I think that's even cheaper than in Ontario. So that's, not surprising, but very interesting. Bennett says regular gas was $1.49 in the run-up to Carney announcing he was pausing the carbon tax. It went up to $1.57 during that time. Since pausing the carbon tax, it has dropped to $1.35. So in reality, it's dropped roughly 12 cents, not 20. And it won't be long before those prices begin to creep back up. As we've seen time and again, every time it looks like we're getting some reprieve economically, central planners use that as an opportunity to seek out more ill-gotten gains and keep us barely treading water. Enjoy it while it lasts. Yeah, it's unfortunate, right? Like, it's one of those things where it seems like we're being tricked. We're getting played, right? Yesterday I was saying we're driving away from a restaurant where we were overcharged and we're angry at ourselves for not doing anything, and we're not even doing anything about that. Melissa Lanceman says, same people, same party, same policies. Mark Carney confirms he will not build new pipelines if elected. He will keep in place Bill C-69. keep our current resources in the ground, keep Canada's reliance on the United States. A fourth Liberal term means it's all the same. Vote for change. So how is this change at all, right? They're running on a change ticket. It's not change. Here's Mark Carney.
C-69 with your plans to build infrastructure in Canada. Do you plan to repeal Bill C-69?
We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69, to answer your question directly.
C-69 with your plans to build infrastructure in Canada. Do you plan to repeal Bill C-69?
We do not plan to repeal Bill C-69, to answer your question directly.
So that's interesting, right? Sorry, I was looking at my streaming thing. I guess all my streams have failed this morning. So maybe there's an infrastructure problem. I'm not sure what's going on with that. Very strange. I'll try. I don't think I'll try and reconnect because I think that's a bad experience. So we'll just carry on. Very, very interesting that Mark Carney is confirming that he will not build pipelines. Chris says Mark Carney will not build new pipelines if elected. Carney announces he will keep Trudeau's No New Pipelines Bill C-69. This bill makes it impossible to build pipelines and energy infrastructure Canada needs. A fourth Liberal term means more reliance on the Americans. So everybody and their dog, all of the premiers, the leadership in all the cabinet positions, Carney, Trudeau, everybody, they were saying, the best way to solve this problem is to diversify away from the Americans, to make sure that our economy is very, very strong and robust, just even without the Americans. And we've done nothing, absolutely nothing. And they're making commitments to continue to do nothing. So it seems terrible. It seems absolutely terrible. So what's going on with that? I have absolutely no idea, but it seems like we are being played again, right? Danielle Smith says less than 2 weeks ago, Mark Carney told me in person that C-69 was a barrier to large national energy projects and needed to be dealt with. Now he says he has no intention to do anything with it. Make no mistake, if this law stays, there will be few, if any, large-scale energy infrastructure projects built in this country, and Alberta and Saskatchewan will be cut off from international markets. This means Canada will become more vulnerable to and overly dependent on the United States. Albertans will not tolerate this, and neither will I. Hopefully this election results in a new prime minister that can be trusted to get rid of these terrible policies. Maybe. We'll see. Kevin, I'll believe it when I see it. How about that? Western Standard's reporting pipeline paradox. Brookfield to buy U.S. pipeline giant as Carney refuses to repeal Bill C-69 pipeline ban. Isn't that interesting? Kevin says, unbelievable. So Mark Carney's business that he has investments in, lots of investments in, millions of dollars of investment in because he ran it for a while, is investing in pipelines. And he's doing his job, right, as a former Brookfield man, right, once a Brookfield man, always a Brookfield man, to make sure that they don't have any competition in the government of Canada or anything like that, right? Super duper weird. Isn't that strange? So the Libs were trying to run on a wave of goodwill after they repealed this carbon tax, and it's kind of blowing up in their faces. All the stuff that they're doing, I don't know that they're actually getting credit for, because people are pointing out that they were the ones who initially put all of these policies in place. So now we're back to null. If anything, they were the ones who caused this problem with their bad policies, and they're removing their own bad policies. It's not change. And the bad policies that are still in place that are preventing pipelines and enrichment and use of our own natural resources, those are still in place, and these people have no interest to change it. So I think it's blowing up in their face. The goodwill, if any, that people had towards them is evaporating quickly. And when people realize that they're not offering anything different, well, do you think that they're going to continue flocking to globalist Carney, to Chinese liberal communist Carney? Here's Jim Murphy. He says, I understand this is popular in Quebec today. And so it's Chi being run around on a rickshaw by Mark Carney, right? So very interesting. I'm intrigued with, I like memes and things like that. It's interesting to see how the art is impacting, and like the memes, etc., are impacting the election. Although at this point, like, Mark Carney's terrible. I don't understand how anybody at all can believe these rigged polls. Here's the CBC panel discussing Mark Carney and his problems with China and Paul Chiang, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They say they think it's a big miss with the party and opportunity to demonstrate leadership lost. Here we go.
Mark Carney failed to demonstrate leadership.
Of course. I mean, this was a tale in two campaigns. I mean, this story broke on Friday.
It came up on Saturday. I think I predicted that if he didn't make a decision, he was going to come to regret it quite quickly. Come Monday morning, he was still standing by the candidate, said he has his full confidence, he's going to continue the campaign, dismissed any questions about it. And then once RCMP investigation comes to light, he changed his mind, or the candidate resigned. To Cheryl's point, he is untested in these particular situations, and I think on this first big test of leadership, he failed. When you're a leader and you're presented with the facts of a case, they probably had much more background on this as well. He was faced with a decision. He chose to wait it out for whatever reason. We don't know. I think he just thought that the news cycle would bury. It didn't, and they lost a couple days in the campaign for it, rightly so. And now they've really lost any high ground that they have on anything about foreign interference, because anytime it comes up again, they'll just bring up this scenario, or they'll bring up Chandra Arya.
Yeah, and people did point to this is a clear case of foreign interference that is happening because it originated with this bounty from the PRC. Michelle, what do you say?
They're kind of brushing it under. Oh yeah, this bounty from the People's Republic of China, as you have randomly. No, that's not normal. An oil exec says CTV alerting Canadians that the Liberals knew about Chiang since January and chose not to act on it. And 40 international human rights agencies and the RCMP put pressure on Mark Carney to do the right thing, and he still didn't act, still didn't fire Chiang. Some prime minister, right? And so here, I just want to show you this because this is interesting. GM Forbes says, seeing a lot of people asking where the RCMP are in this Paul Chiang scandal, tucked away in Carney's back pocket, just like they were in Trudeau's. So here's a picture of Mark Carney and his buddy, the RCMP chief there, or one of the chiefs, I'm not sure which one. And GM says, just to get ahead of the clowns for Carney coming into the thread to claim it's a fake photo. Here's the post from March 11th, 2025 with Mark Carney. He says, today I met with the Commissioner Mike Duheme to discuss the RCMP's ongoing work to keep our border strong and keep Canadians safe. National security and safety are crucial to Canada's success, and they will be a fundamental focus of my government. So, right, he's already... The implication is that he's already had conversations with anybody and everybody who you need to have conversations with, right? And same as Trudeau, protected. And it does seem that way. The media is behaving that way as well. Here's Brian Lilly. He says, I'm glad I'm not the only one who picked up on this. Carney isn't just lifting policy from Poilievre, plagiarizing Poilievre's policy. Ooh, that's a tongue twister. He's now taking part of his speech. He's trying to convince you he's a centrist. He's not. So here's Carney. He's got everything but the bring it home. He doesn't say powerful paychecks, but you can almost see a part where he almost says it and then he stops himself. Not really, but ish.
4 generations, Canadians have built this great country on the idea that if you work hard, like the people here at New Flyer, if you work hard, you should be able to afford a good life. A good job that covers the bills. Have a good home in a welcoming and safe community. 4 generations. Canadians.
There you go, right? Welcoming and safe communities. So, I mean, that's all very right-wing. Very, very right-wing. Whoa, powerful paychecks? Hold on a second. An oil exec says Carney responds to the threat his party issued against the media for reporting his plagiarism. Your party threatened our media subsidies because they didn't like the piece. Is this what journalists can expect from a Carney Liberal government? So journalists calling him out for trying to put pressure on the publications for publishing pieces about Carney being a plagiarist. Here is Mark Carney. And I don't think he answers there's another one where somebody asks him about the plagiarism from 10 years ago, and he's arrogant, very, very arrogant in his response, but he doesn't answer the question in his response. We'll get to there in a minute. Here we go.
Post published a piece revealing 10 instances of plagiarism in your doctoral thesis. Your party responded by attacking the academic who was quoted in the piece. Some of your surrogates mentioned pulling media subsidies because they didn't like the piece. First of all, did you plagiarize? And is this a demeanor we can expect from a Carney government? Will you attack the media when you don't like the work we do?
Thank you for your question. I'm pleased that there's such interest in my doctoral thesis. It's sort of languished on the shelf for over 3 decades. I think what you'll find in the middle of...
There isn't interest in his doctoral thesis. Nobody's interested in his doctoral thesis on game theory. Nobody's interested in that. They're interested that he plagiarized it because he's the prime minister now. Nobody's interested in his doctoral thesis. It's garbage. It's plagiarized nonsense. The Oxford, the institution that issued it, should be under investigation too, because they allowed plagiarism, right? And so should the people who oversaw him. But he's not addressing any of that. He's dismissing all of that, right? And so like that's not appropriate.
Of that piece is a very clear refutation of these quote allegations by senior-most academic at Oxford, Dr. Meyer, who was categorical in her rejection of many of the conclusions that you just made. So if your question is, does a professor at Oxford, well, I think the statement of Dr. Meyer stands is pretty obvious where it is, and as I say, I'm pleased that there is intense interest in a game theory thesis of 30-something years ago.
So often in politics, one of the tropes is don't answer the question you're asked, answer the question you want to answer, right? And he was going to directly put a different question in the reporter's mouth and then thought better of it. Like, if you're going to ask, and then he said, never mind, that her statement stands by itself. And we looked at it yesterday, and it's nonsense. And Mark Carney doesn't sound smart. He sounds like a condescending professor who nobody's challenged in a while. He does not sound smart. He doesn't sound quick on his feet. He doesn't sound like somebody who could stand up against an onslaught with his ideas, defending his ideas. I just don't I don't see it. He seems like a puppet, just like Trudeau. Here is Kyle Kemper, who's Trudeau's half-brother, right? And he says, Uncle Mark went to, I don't know if this is true. Like this, you have to take this with a grain of salt. I think this is probably, this is a little fringy, right? But he's saying that Uncle Mark Carney was at the Bilderberg meetings where they plan all of this stuff. I don't know. We'll play it but take it with a grain of salt, right? Maybe.
Hey, everybody. There's a lot of rumors swirling around about my Uncle Mark, Mark Carney. It's true. He was a multi-year attendee of Bilderberg meetings. If you don't know what Bilderberg is, it's an annual gathering of the world's elite, the heads of industry and war and media and pharmaceuticals. Basically all come together and they just plan, what's in store for humanity. And it's kind of an exclusive group, but Uncle Mark's always kind of rolled with exclusive crowds. It's true.
That's an Epstein nod.
Also, he was very active in the World Economic Forum. He's a big-time participant. He likes to speak there. When he goes there, they roll out the white carpet for him. It's pretty awesome. Uncle Mark's been pretty blessed. He was the banker. He's a big-time banker. He's a central banker, not just a regular banker, like a central banker. He's the head of the Bank of Canada and he's the head of the Bank of England. He sold the last of Canada's gold. We don't need gold. He sold the last of it, got rid of it. He went over to England. He oversaw a lot of kind of economic activity over there. Anyways, Uncle Mark, there's one thing I know about Uncle Mark. It's that he knows best. Him and
So this is Bilderberg tying him to Bilderberg, the Epstein nod, WEF. These are things that most people don't find popular, I don't think. I don't think that most rank and file people look at that kind of stuff and think to themselves, yes, that is what I want in a leader. No, right? That Poilievre's made political hay by promising no WEF influence in his government, even though there is WEF influence currently in his advisors and sitting in his government, he doesn't have a government, in his opposition seats. So it's one of those things where you can say anything you want, but the reality is different. And you can say, I am not drinking a tea right now, but the reality is different, as I took a sip, right? So it's just one of those things, right? It is what it is. Back to the Chiang thing. Here is the Hong Kong police bounty, if you're interested. Hong Kong police force. This is the link is here if you want to check it out. Okay. But here is an image just to make it easy. And it says incitement to secession, collusion with a foreign country, with or with external elements to endanger national security. And so this is Joseph Tay. Between July 20th, July 2020 and June 24, Joseph Tay operated a channel named Hong Konger Station on social media platforms to publish numerous videos inciting secession, and through various platforms and means repeatedly urged foreign countries to impose sanctions on the officials of the central government and the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region government, and engage in other hostile activities against the People's Republic of China and the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. And they have a reward of a million Hong Kong dollars is being offered by the police to any member of the public who can provide information on this wanted person and the related crime. So there you go. This is all of the stuff going on. Pretty wild stuff that he's wanted in Hong Kong for doing videos like I do, right? This is apparently secession, right? And if you don't think that Canada will stoop to those levels, man, I hope you're right. I'm out here on the tightrope, hoping desperately that you're right. And I don't like heights. Anyway, Ron Unfiltered says, I just hit page 396 of Mark Carney's book out of 508, and wow, he's completely out of touch with Canadians. Well, I mean, you can just look at his teeth to see that. This isn't a guide for the people. It's a blueprint for the rich, by the rich. He pushes digital currencies, global governance, and a future run by banks, not citizens. Lives in Canada will get worse if this man leads the way. And get this, in chapter 16, which is about Canada, he randomly uses India as his example of where to sell products online, not across Canada, not your local economy, India. Why? Strange coincidence, considering he just removed a candidate over India-linked interference, and his son works for Brookfield, which has major Indian investments. The more I read, the more this feels like a global corporate playbook, not a vision for Canadians. Anyone with a half a brain who's reading this will understand the reality of his vision. So this excerpt says, the nature of commerce is changing rapidly. Sales are increasing, taking place online and over platforms rather than in malls. The value of intangible capital like software and intellectual property now dwarfs that of physical capital like factories and real property. We are entering an age where production can be remotely controlled, where anyone can broadcast their performance globally via YouTube or sell to India, whatever the size of their business, via platforms like Shopify. As a society, we need to choose our DBD, that is, we will be digital by default, letting technology drive our choices and rule. That's where it ends. I'm sure that's not the end of the sentence. Drive our choices and rule. We don't want technology to drive our choices and rule, do we? I don't think so. But it's very, very interesting. And like these stupid acronyms like DBD sounds very globalist. Build back better, DBD, all the crap. It's bullshit. Nobody says that. Oh, I'm glad we're DBD, digital by default. You morons. And there's so much wrong with it. It's ridiculous. And Mark Carney betrays himself and continually sounds unintelligent. Kamala says, hey, Pierre. So Pierre Poilievre's talking about women's biological clocks. I talk about women sometimes on this show, and I think that women have been sold a raw deal. I think that women were coerced out of the house using a propaganda campaign that sold them an idea that work was this wonderful playground of friends and all sorts of stuff and like money and independence and you don't need a man, you need a job and like all sorts of stuff in order to get, like, they had a vested interest in getting women out to work. And what everybody kind of thought was after women had their kids, of course they can go and work, right? After women had their children, after, all of that, of course, if they want to go have a job, they can have a job. That's what people thought they were signing up for. What they were actually signing up for was every woman needs a job because the government wants their tax dollars. And me pointing this out isn't popular, but some people get itchy about it. Some people get frustrated or think that I'm somehow saying that like that's the only thing that women should do. And that's not necessarily what I'm saying, but I think that we get it wrong in the West. Like, we are living a slave life in order to give 60% of our production to the government in the form of taxes. And we live isolated. We don't live in a family unit. We don't live, or a lot of people don't live in a family unit or don't live in a broader family support group of like people who really want the best for you and your kids, right? And your family, right? And I think we've been led astray. And one of the ways they did that, and not the only way, but one of the ways, is selling this false reality to women of this feminist bullshit. And it's bullshit. And like, so maybe that's why people don't like maybe that's what people don't like. But I think it's fundamentally bullshit that this whole feminist idea is good for women. It's not good for women. Anyway, regardless of that, it's not good for men. It's not good for families. It's not good for anything. But here's Poilievre talking about biological clocks, and woo, the liberal women are angry, right? Calm down, ma'am. Here we go.
We will not forget that young 36-year-old couple whose biological clock is running out faster than they can afford to buy a home and have kids. We will not forget.
Yowza, right? And I mean, like, why are people itchy about that? Why are people sensitive about that, right? If you're sensitive about that, maybe there's something to be sensitive about. Maybe that's what you think about. Maybe that's what keeps you up at night. You know what I mean? And I'm not, like, hopefully I'm not necessarily talking to my viewers, but I'm saying people who are fighting for the status quo, what are we really fighting for? There's a question, right? And are we really fighting to continue giving 60% of our money to the government so they can send that money to Ukraine? Like, really? Really? That's what we're doing? What do you think? Do you think Poilievre misstepped with this talk of biological clocks, or do you think that this is the right move and he's talking to his base here and those people will hear him? Here is an MP, or a former MP candidate, federal Liberal candidate for Brampton West. She says, on behalf of 36-year-old women everywhere, it's your time that's running out, not ours, she says. And I don't think she understands what the biological clock is. I learned about that through Look Who's Talking. So remember, Bruce Willis was Mikey? Anyway, regardless of all of that, my parents thought it was hilarious. And the whole opening sequence where the sperm is fertilizing the egg, my parents were killing themselves laughing. And my brother and I were sitting there happily eating popcorn, not understanding what we were watching. Anyway, regardless of all of that, the Toronto police are saying, our members are disappointed but not surprised to learn that a man arrested for 3 separate random incidents of violence in downtown Toronto was already on bail for other serious charges. In fact, a judge granted bail even though he was wanted in another jurisdiction. When will this revolving door end for this person? And at what point will the safety of our community and members come first? We know there are pressing issues facing voters in this federal election, but we cannot ignore the changes desperately needed to our justice system. And we hope at some point we will hear all parties share their plans for public safety. The victims of these random attacks and others deserve to know how their federal government will prevent this from happening again. Well, we'll see. Poilievre says after 10 years of liberal catch and release policies, our women and men in uniform are pleading for change to bring home safe streets. You can't afford a 4th liberal term in power. On April 28th, vote for change to bring jail, not bail, for violent repeat offenders. Vote Conservative. The Liberals are running on a change ticket too. Isn't that weird? It's so strange. Everybody's saying we're going to change everything that we voted for in the last few years. Strange. Here's Doug Ford talking about tariffs. And Doug Ford says President Trump calls tomorrow Liberation Day. That's today. I call it Termination Day. Tariffs are an absolute job killers. Millions of Americans' livelihoods will be put at risk. So Doug Ford has this media, and we'll listen to a minute of it. It's the same kind of stuff we've heard before. Mark Carney said no tariffs. Doug Ford saying tariffs. We'll see what actually happens. I have no idea. I think no tariffs are probably the right answer, but we'll see. Punishing Canadians with counter tariffs doesn't seem to be a smart move whatsoever at all. Here's Doug Ford.
Canadian officials have prepared retaliatory tariffs for whatever President Trump announces tomorrow. Will the severity of your response depend on what you hear from President Trump?
That's correct, Ryan. First of all, I always start off every interview saying Canadians love Americans. They love the U.S. I love the U.S. I spent 20 years of my life there. But yes, we're going to retaliate. We're going to retaliate appropriately, but hard as well. As I've always said, we have the 2 greatest countries in the world. Let's build an AMCAN fortress. You know, President Trump ran on growing the economy, creating jobs. And that's not going to happen. It's going to hurt the American economy. I don't call it Liberation Day for Americans. I call it Termination Day because there are people going to be laid off. Assembly lines will shut down. You can't just cut off your largest customer in the world, and that's Canada. And we're at a fever pitch right now in this country as my American friends are just going on their daily business every day. There's 40 million Canadians that are ramped up, literally going down retail shopping aisles, looking to see what's made in Canada, what's made in the U.S.
That's not happening. I don't think that's happening at all. Here is X Alerts. He says Vietnam cuts all tariffs on U.S. goods. So India's Prime Minister Modi is now considering cutting $23 billion worth of tariffs on U.S. imports. So they want to have trade. They want trade. Here's gov.exe, and he says Danielle Smith rips apart CTV, calling their political bullshit, their polling bullshit, saying people don't realize the danger of export tariffs on energy. So Danielle Smith is not in favor of retaliatory tariffs or threatening anything to do with our energy. Here we go.
Our latest CTV polling by Nano says fewer than 25% of people on the prairies are against using oil and gas and other energy items to fight back against Donald Trump's tariffs. So why do you say that if Canada decided to use our resources to strike back at America, it would spark a unity crisis when it appears that the majority of Canadians would support such action?
Well, I think it's a garbage poll, frankly, and you can let your bosses know that, because what if we were to ask Albertans or Canadians this? Would you support export tariffs if it meant the U.S. would retaliate by shutting off Line 5 and leaving Ontario and Quebec without gasoline or aviation fuel at all? I think you'd get a different answer. I think people need to look at a map, see where Eastern Canada gets its oil and gas from, and realize that it's a very, very dangerous game to be talking about tariffing energy and to talk about turning the taps off. I think we saw that when it was attempted with electricity. The result was immediate. The Americans came forward with a 50% tariff on steel and aluminum, and it had to be walked back. So I don't even want to play with that fire on a cross-border trade worth $150 billion.
Yeah, it's a lot of money. And if you push $150 billion into the middle and they shrug and call your bluff and you're holding a pair of deuces, I mean, at least you got a pair, right? Like, the food professor says, our dollar is making me nervous. Tariff talks are weakening the US dollar big time, but the Canadian dollar is also under pressure. In 2008, when the American economy was hammered by the financial crisis, our dollar went above par and our food inflation still almost 8%. We buy and import food from all over the world priced in US dollars. This is not good. And he's responding to himself. He says, Mark Carney says Canada will not impose retaliatory tariffs today on most U.S. foods and other essential goods. Certainly welcome news. But it's still bad. We're still in a bad situation. And our leadership does not appear to understand the gravity of the situation, and they only want to harm us further with it. So that's unfortunate, right? That's not great. John says, the classical defense of free trade is that a country should produce what it can make most efficiently, export its surplus, and rely on imports for the stuff, the concentration on comparative. Okay, I'm going to restart. The classical defense of free trade is that a country should produce what it can make most efficiently, export its surplus, and rely on imports for the stuff the concentration on comparative advantage squeeze out. But that's not what's happening in the world today. And he continues. Basically, the argument he's making is, he says, what this means is that the classical objection to tariffs, they lower global output, no longer applies because the game's been so rigged. Okay, he carries on. This is the explanation. He says, instead of a system where production is distributed by comparative advantage, the English make cloth, the Portuguese make wine, they trade with each other, trade roughly balances. We have one where it's distributed by industrial policy. This has extremely important economic implications. Under a system of comparative advantage, trade interventions tend to increase efficiency. The world winds up poorer because output is lower than it could be. Under a system of predatory mercantilism, trade interventions like tariffs can increase inefficiency by moving production away from the industrial policy assigned distribution. We live in a world where major economies have implemented an extremely successful system of predatory mercantilism, which means what that means is that the classical objection to tariffs, they lower global output, no longer applies. So the game's been so rigged the game's been so changed that what Trump is doing isn't having the same impact that it used to. Their objection is outdated, right? And so, I mean, like, that's just interesting. All of that is interesting to me. Mike says, Marine Le Pen. Let's talk about France. We've got, hold on, I've got to move France a little bit. We'll do our grab bag of governance before we go international. Right Blend is reporting on Tamara Lich and Chris Barber, and he says, Freedom Convoy protester Tamara Lich and Chris Barber will receive their verdict in the longest mischief trial in Canadian history on Thursday. Follow me for extensive coverage throughout the day with additional collaborative coverage from Chris Dacey. And so that's good. It's interesting that that's happening. And I think that because Carney is the prime minister and Trudeau is not, that we are in a situation where they will get a lighter sentence than if Trudeau was still the prime minister. If they were sentenced in in March, let's say, when Prime Minister Trudeau was still the Prime Minister, or February when he was the Prime Minister, then things would have gone worse. I think that now it's probably suspended sentence, house arrest, or anything like that, if there is any quote unquote jail time, right? I think that otherwise, I don't think that they're going to throw the book at these people the same way they would have. Now, I'm not saying that they're not going to get anything. I'm just saying that it's not going to be as severe as it otherwise would have been. So that's good. I hope the sentence is light, because I don't think these people are guilty of anything. I think the government is guilty, and I think that we're watching an example be made of fellow citizens to warn other citizens not to do what they're doing, honestly. And I don't think that they did anything illegal. In fact, I think that probably they would be leaders in another configuration, right? Like, so all of this is all done to maintain the control grid and system that we're currently in. Melanie says, hello everyone, thanks very much for watching. This is just a short version of a longer show. If you'd like to get the whole show, you can go over to CanadaPoly.com and sign up for a subscription. Just look in the drop-down tab for Shop and Donate and look for subscriptions, and you'll get immediate access to the full show. Love to see you. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a wonderful, wonderful